Okay, grab your attention real quick. I'll go ahead and go through creating, we'll say the first wall type, okay? Let's do a quick little review. So I'm gonna go to, actually I'll use the 3D mode, that'll work for me. I've already created all 4, but I'm gonna go ahead and create another one. I'm just gonna call this wall type 5, even though it's gonna look exactly the same as wall type 1. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and click on wall, architectural, and over here on our properties dialog box, we're gonna go to edit type, and typically I would say always start with one that's as close as possible. We're not gonna run into that here because we don't have any materials or anything like what we have. So good to just, I'm gonna duplicate, we'll say generic 6-inch, I'll start with that because it has nothing associated with it. And I'm gonna duplicate that, and you're gonna call it wall type 1, I'm gonna call it wall type 5 because it won't let me create wall type 1, and we're going to hit OK. All right, from there we're going to go to edit structure, and let me just reference my exercise real quick. I think I say, let me just see how I organize these wall types here. So for the first one, we got a 4-inch wood stud, 5-inch chipboard on the interior, which we'll color red, and that would be an ugly interior, but that's okay. And we have 1/2-inch plywood, 1-inch brick pattern on the exterior. All right. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and change this structure to 4 inches. All right. So that's going to be our 4-inch stud. We can change the material to lumber if you want to do that. Not super critical for what we're doing here, but if we're thinking technically for other assignments. Let's go ahead and do the interior side first. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a new layer into my wall type. I'm going to move it down to below my core boundary. Okay, remember that the only material that should be between the core boundary is the structure. Okay, sometimes I see a handful of people that put all of them in between. You're not going to want to do that. So we're going to go ahead and make this will be our finish, and we're going to go ahead and make this chipboard. Okay, so let me do one that's not one that I've already created. So I'm going to create, let's see, actually gypsum wallboard white would be our standard. So I'll go ahead and select that. All right, so the only difference is that we want to make this red. All right, so let's call this, 5/8 of an inch thick. And we're going to go over to our material, and let's duplicate this. So I'm going to pretend that I don't already have one. All right, I'm going to duplicate this, and let's call this gypsum wallboard red. I'm going to call that 2. All right. So from there, what I'm going to do is you could go up to appearance and you could change the texture map to a red texture map if you wanted to. That texture map does not exist in Revit. So the only way you would be able to do that would be to create it in like Photoshop. Okay. But we have another workaround that we can do to get the red gypsum wallboard. Okay, so that's one method which would actually be ideal, but we can do it another way, which is we're going to go down to where it says tint, and we're going to check that. We're going to check tint, and then below that it says what tint color do you want. And what tint does is it just basically, it gives you a color overlay over any material. It doesn't matter if it's brick, stone, you know, what have you, it doesn't matter. But all it does is give you a color overlay. In the instance of chipboard, our texture map is basically nothing. There's no really texture to chipboard. So this is a situation where we can actually add a tint like this, and it's gonna just make it nice and red. Okay, you can try to experiment with that for like stone and other materials. Sometimes I'll use the tint if the stone that I found that I want to use isn't quite right. It's close to the color material that I want to get, but it's just a little bit off. Maybe it's not quite red enough or not quite orange enough. I'll add just, you know, a very faint color tint to my material just to tweak the image map just a little bit. Okay, I typically do that in Photoshop because I use Photoshop a lot and I can get a better result if I do Photoshop, but tint usually works pretty well to get a quick result. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and that will be my gypsum wallboard red that I wanted to create. All right, and now I can create my other layers for the exterior of my wall. So I'm going to go to Insert, and I'll move that up, and this will be my plywood. So So I'm going to change that to a substrate. We're going to make that, I think I said a 1/2 inch thick. We'll make this plywood. It's called plywood sheathing inside Revit. Okay, and now we could create our brick material. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and insert one more layer. We're going to call this our finish, and we'll make this 1 inch thick. And for material, we can go ahead and create our new custom brick material. So we're going to go to create new material. We're going to hit OK. All right, we're going to rename this. We'll say brick material 1. Okay. Yep, there we go. So we have brick material number 1. So right now there's no image map associated with this at all. Okay. So I'm going to click on that image box, and then from here I can download my image that you downloaded from Canvas. All right, so that's going to be brick pattern number 1. So I'm going to select that. That will import it. So now the next thing that you have to think about is the scale of the image. Okay, if we double click on the image map, it will open up. You'll notice that it says that from here to here is 1 foot. Well, we know that a typical brick is about 4 by 8 inches. Okay, depending on the product that you're using. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 10 layers of brick. So that's actually going to be 40 inches. Okay, so we're going to change the height. So if we go down in our texture editor, if we go down to scale, we can change the height to 40 inches. Okay, so that changes it to 3'4", and I believe that's actually correct for the bottom dimension as well. If you needed to change it, if for whatever reason the auto scale didn't work, you could always uncheck the linked scale and you can manually input a width if you need to. I don't think that's the case. I think that is actually correct. A couple other options, even though this is not applicable to what we're doing right this second, you can rotate the image if you needed to. Maybe you wanted to make like a soldier course brick pattern, whereas actually it is a vertical brick. You could rotate that if you wanted to, so just depending on what you're trying to do. All right, other than that, I think that's about it. An option to how you want the texture to repeat itself. Tiling is typically always the answer, okay? And there's a few other little editors as well, but what we just did is the most common edits that you'll make to your map. So I'm then going to hit done, and everything here looks good. If you want to, you can edit some of the other attributes if you want. Glossiness, brick isn't typically super glossy. The only reason why that would ever come into play is if you were doing a rendering, okay, where it actually looked into those attributes. But for what we're doing, none of that will matter, okay? So this looks good. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. That's going to be our brick material 1. We're going to hit OK again, OK. And now if I, using my wall type number 5, I can then draw it. You can see I drew it the opposite direction, but you can see that we have our red chipboard on one side and we have our brick on our exterior side. Okay? Any questions about that? Good? Okay, so keep working on the critical thinking exercise for another half an hour, 40 minutes or so. Okay? I'll come around and help you guys if needed, but that'll be a quick little rundown of creating a custom material.
Excuse me.
Yeah.